God tests Abraham's faith by sending him on a 3-day journey to sacrifice his son. Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a drama from 2023 titled His Only Son. The movie is set in the year 2000 BC, in the land of Canaan, where the prophet Abraham is awakened by God calling out to him. He gets up and goes outside to bow before God, who is standing before Abraham as a glowing hooded figure. God instructs Abraham to take his only son, Isaac, to the lands of Moriah and to sacrifice Isaac atop one of the mountains. When God leaves, Abraham repeatedly cries out, "No," unable to bear the thought of sacrificing his own son. In the morning, Abraham starts preparing for the journey when his wife, Sarah, asks what he's doing. He tells her about God coming down to give him a command, and Sarah worries about Abraham and Isaac's 3-day journey to Moriah. Because of Abraham's old age, she requests that he take a couple of other men along for the journey. Abraham approached his chief servant, Eliezer, to ask if any men could accompany him to Moriah. Eliezer volunteered his own son, Kelzar, because he knew that Kelzar was the best man available, and they both respected Abraham as their leader. Afterward, Abraham went into Isaac's tent, still seeming troubled about God's request. Isaac came in and told his father about his morning activities, before Abraham tells him to pack up for their journey to Moriah. They were soon ready to travel, with Kelzar bringing along the servant's errand boy named Eshkolam. Before leaving, Sarah called Isaac to give him a goodbye kiss. Then she came over to give Abraham a goodbye kiss too. She reminded Isaac to take care of his father and Abraham to take care of his son in return. Finally, the men left their land on foot with one donkey to carry their supplies. In a flashback from 40 years ago, Abraham, whose name used to be Abram, had just encountered God for the first time. He told Sarah, whose name used to be Sarai, about this revelation because they had been praying to pagan gods their whole life before this encounter. Abram said that God told him to move to a land that God would show to him. Sarai wasn't convinced, especially when Abram said that God promised him a nation and a son. Despite Sarai's uncertainty, Abram's faith was solid. In the present, Abraham and his men are approached by horseback riding guards from the kingdom of Pelesheth. They demand tithes for the use of King Abimelech's roads. Abraham claims that they have nothing of value, but the guards don't believe him and scatter all the supplies. Abraham reveals they are heading to Hebron and introduces himself. The guards are surprised, as Abraham is highly regarded by King Abimelech. This is because Abraham is known as the man who led shepherds to defeat the kings of Shinar and save the Sodomites who were held captive. The guards decide to leave the men be. Kelzar scoffs at the Pelishti guards' behavior, but Eshkolam gets offended because he was born as a Pelishti before becoming Abraham's servant. As the sun sets, the men decide to make camp near some large rocks. While huddling around the fire, Eshkolam asks why Abraham saved the Sodomites from the eastern kings. Abraham explains that some of his family members were among the captive Sodomites, and he felt it was necessary to rescue them. When Eshkolam brings up the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Kelzar believes that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was due to their wickedness, but Abraham reminds him that they too can be wicked if they stray from God's path. As they try to sleep, Abraham has a flashback of when God visited him and promised him land for his descendants. When he and Sarai arrived in Canaan, the land was barren and they had no children. Sarai doubted God's plan, but Abraham had faith. One day, he caught Sarai praying to her old pagan gods using sticks and stones and prevented her from continuing, but she seemed desperate as God hadn't delivered on his promises. After 10 years of waiting for God's promises to be fulfilled, God visited Abraham again and assured him that his heir would be of his own flesh and blood, rather than being his chief servant. God promised that Abraham's descendants would create and lead many nations. Upon returning home the next day, Abram was covered in blood. Sarai ordered her maid, Hagar, to fetch a bowl of water, while Abram told his wife about the covenant God made with him. Sarai cries, believing that God wants Abraham to have a child with Hagar since she is unable to conceive. Abram refuses, but Sarai insists, and Hagar becomes pregnant. However, this causes tension between Sarai and Hagar, and Sarai feels hurt that her husband has slept with her maid despite it being her idea. Abram tries to calm her down, but she remains upset. One night God visits Abram again and changes his name to Abraham, and his wife's name to Sarah. God promises that Sarah will bear a son that shall be named Isaac. Isaac shall create kings throughout the world from his descendants. True to his word, not long after, Sarah told Abraham that she could feel a child inside her belly, and then Isaac was born soon afterward. Finally, since her son is alive in her arms, Sarah believes that God is good as he has kept his promises. In the present, morning arrives, and the men continue on their journey. On their way, they encounter a mortally wounded man by the roadside. They try to help him and ask who attacked him, but the man only cries out about her daughter being taken before he finally dies. Abraham suspects that the Pelishti guards they encountered earlier are responsible, which offends Eshkolam once again. Abraham refuses to bury the man because his body will now serve as a witness to the culprit's wickedness. The men approach the city of Hebron, but they choose not to enter. Near the gates of Hebron, a man offers them the company of some girls for their amusement, but they decline and continue on their way. Passing Hebron, Kelzar shares with Eshkolam that he was born there, explaining that Abraham's family used to live in Hebron. Eshkolam, curious, asks if Ishmael was also born there, referring to Abraham's firstborn son with Hagar. As night falls, the men prepare to camp, and Kelzar and Eshkolam question Abraham about their journey. They don't understand why God would require such a long journey just to make a sacrifice. Eshkolam keeps challenging Abraham's faith, but Abraham explains his reasoning gracefully. He says that God ordered the sacrifice to remind them that death is a penalty for sin and that only God knows its true meaning and purpose. However, Eshkolam thinks it's only an act of penance for Abraham's sin related to Hagar and Ishmael. Later that night, Abraham can't sleep as he thinks of his son. He walks away from camp to pray to God, begging for God to take his life instead of Isaac's if the sacrifice is truly meant as a punishment for Abraham's sin. After receiving no answer, Abraham leaves, unaware that God is standing behind him, silently watching. In the morning, Abraham is pondering when Isaac asks why his father has been so distant these past few days. Abraham assures his son he's done nothing wrong, but God sometimes demands for great and impossible tasks. Isaac asks if anything is too difficult for the Lord, and Abraham replies no. The men continue their journey, finally nearing Mount Moriah. They take a break in a cave, where Kelzar asks about the cryptic markings on Abraham's staff. Abraham says it was passed down to him from his father, and many generations before him, so he's not sure what the markings mean, as it may be from a forgotten language. Eshkolam makes a jab at Isaac, who's going to inherit everything owned by Abraham now, including Eshkolam and Kelzar as his servants. Eshkolam is also still upset about Abraham accusing the Pelishti guards of killing the man from yesterday and kidnapping his daughter. Abraham explains that the Pelishti king's guards are notorious for their debauchery and wickedness, making it likely that they are the culprits. He also mentions that King Abimelech has a history of kidnapping young women to enslave them. Abraham shares a personal account, revealing that even Sarah was once abducted by Pelishti guards to be placed in King Abimelech's harem. However, after God inflicted a plague upon the king's household and his people, Sarah was returned to Abraham unharmed. As part of the restitution, Abraham received some wealth and servants. He reveals that this incident is how Eshkolam and his mother came to be a part of his household. Eshkolam remains unconvinced by Abraham's reasoning and perceives him as self-righteous. It turns out that Eshkolam is Ishmael's friend, and he feels betrayed by Abraham's decision to banish Ishmael and Hagar from his family. Kelzar, who is very loyal to Abraham's family, yells at Eshkolam to stop his aggression toward Abraham and Isaac. Abraham explains that God had instructed him to send Ishmael and Hagar away as Isaac grew older, due to Ishmael's envy and spite towards Isaac, mirroring Hagar's feelings towards Sarah. He shares that God assured him that Ishmael would find his own nation, which is why he followed God's order to banish the two. Kelzar has had enough of Eshkolam's insolence, so he drags Eshkolam out of the cave as Eshkolam curses Abraham for enslaving the Pelishti people. When Abraham tries to help him up, Eshkolam instead pushes him away, prompting Kelzar to restrain him and orders Isaac to help tie him up. Eshkolam tries to attack Abraham with a rock, claiming that this is his land, but Abraham defends himself, knocking Eshkolam down with his staff. As Abraham and his men travel past Hebron, they are approached by the Pelishti guards who had previously encountered them. The guards have kidnapped a young woman and demand that Abraham pay a tithe because of their location. Isaac attempts to defend his father, but Abraham warns him not to. It is then revealed that the kidnapped girl is the daughter of a dead man, causing Eshkolam to regret not trusting Abraham earlier. In exchange for the girl's freedom, Isaac agrees to be taken as a tithe by the guards. However, Abraham threatens the guards to leave, resulting in one of them holding Isaac hostage with a sword. When the guard hits Isaac, Abraham unsheathes his dagger and charges at him. The guard stabs Abraham in the shoulder and hits him on the head until he falls. Kelzar comes to the rescue and hits the guard with a rock, causing the Pelishti guards to flee. Despite their wounds, Abraham and his men continue their journey to Moriah. Upon their arrival, Abraham prepares for the sacrificial ritual by placing the wood for the altar on Isaac's back. He informs Kelzar that only he and Isaac will ascend to the summit for the sacrifice. As father and son make their way up the mountain, Abraham hears God's voice, guiding him to the specific summit where the sacrifice should take place. Isaac, growing curious, questions where the lamb for the offering is. Abraham, maintaining his faith, responds that God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice. When they reach the summit and begin setting up the altar, Abraham reveals the harrowing truth to Isaac. God has commanded him to offer Isaac as the sacrifice. Isaac, shocked and confused, asks if there is any alternative. Abraham shares that despite his prayers and pleas to God throughout their journey, the divine command remains unchanged. He expresses his belief that God, as the master of life and death, will somehow restore Isaac's life even after the sacrifice. After sharing a deep and tearful hug, both Abraham and Isaac solemnly come to accept God's command. With a heavy heart, Abraham binds Isaac's hands and lays him on the altar, blindfolding his son. He prepares his dagger, holding it high above Isaac, before suddenly, God commands him to stop. Now God knows that Abraham truly fears him, and as a result, spares Isaac's life. Instead, God directs Abraham to a ram stuck in a nearby thicket, offering it as a substitute for Isaac. Abraham cries out in relief and gratefully prepares the ram as the sacrificial offering. In recognition of Abraham's unwavering faith and willingness to not withhold his son, God makes a promise: all the nations of the earth that will be founded by Abraham's descendants shall be blessed. The movie concludes with a scene set 2,000 years flashing forward to a desolate hilltop, where the crucifixion of Jesus Christ unfolds. This moment is not just a historical event, it's a stark comparison with Abraham and Isaac's story, highlighting the enduring theme of sacrifice. Just as Abraham did not withhold his beloved son from the altar, God did not hesitate to offer his one and only son Jesus in an act of unimaginable love for humanity. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.